So this is a screencast about the country of Afghanistan. Basically, in the screencast, we're going to cover the basics of what makes Afghanistan Afghanistan, diving into the culture and many different forms of politics, art, media, society, economics, education, and really just the broad forms of culture that form the country, as well as diving into the history of conflict that has ravaged in the country for a couple of decades as of now. So, first, we're going to cover the geography of Afghanistan. So, Afghanistan, as of now, is a landlocked country that is located within South Asia and Central Asia. It is also the 40th largest country in the world. Its neighboring countries are Pakistan, Tajikistan, Iran, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and China. The only main natural borders that the country has are the Hindu Kush Mountains, which run northeast southwest. And you can see that on the map. If you look in the northeast, kind of it starts in the province of, or in the town of Joram, which is in the Fakar province, and it runs pretty much all the way through the entire country, ending in the Zarnath province in the southwest. So now looking at the politics, Afghanistan is based on the presidential system, and it is part of the Islamic Republic, which makes up a many different variety of countries in the Middle East. The political beliefs of Afghanistan are mainly socialism, which is very common in the Middle East as well. Its rights are listed in their constitution, and they consist of the rights of life, liberty, privacy, peaceful assembly, and speech. So it's pretty on par with what our constitutional rights are. So the government also has done a pretty good job in ensuring these rights of the citizens, but the country is split up violently because of terrorist groups such as the Taliban and Al Qaeda, which have made it harder over the years to make human rights a priority whilst fighting a war. Because the actual government and legislative parts of Afghanistan are in a war right now with the United States against these groups such as Al Qaeda and Taliban. So now we're going to look at the economics. So the main form of income in Afghanistan is based off of agriculture, and it is very much because it is very much so a third world country. It also gains income from such things as Afghan rugs, wool, cotton, hides, and different types of gemstones. The economy has greatly improved in the last decade, which has allowed a lot of new jobs to open up on a whole different scale of variety. But because of the war, many are still forced to live in the extreme poverty that the country is based on. So much poverty that the average income is the equivalent to only 410 US dollars per year. Surprisingly, with that low level of yearly income and the severe poverty, the gross domestic product, or the GDP of the country, is actually quite high for a third world country, ranking in at 19.47 billion US dollars, which is well above the average country's GDP, which is only at 16,000. And if you see here on the right, these are just different forms of how the economy works in Afghanistan, judging based on the population, life expectancy, mortality rates, and things of that matter. What's also very interesting here is you see how internet is down, but there are a lot of people who still subscribe to different types of mobile phones. So the religion in Afghanistan is, not surprisingly, based off of Islam, and more specifically, the Sunni variety of Islam, which is the most popular and widespread version of Islam. The uh, the actual jurisdiction over this is 99%. The actual number is 99.7% of the country is Muslim, with 90% of those numbers being Sunni and the other 10 being Shia, those being the two biggest forms of Islam. Because that it is a very dominant Muslim country, and because it has kind of a more oppressive form of Sunni, and it is oppressing Shia, it has shaped the country into a war-ravaged place where the Sunnis have been fighting everyone, such as their neighboring Shia members, just based on the fact that they're not they because of the difference that of who should run the religion of Islam. It's different in the Shia and Sunni eyes, and so they fight over that. As well as Sunnis have targeted tourists in order to push a political agenda, and also obviously the United States military since soldiers were deployed there back in 2001. So socially, the country can be chopped up in the following. As we touched in a previous slide about the population and birth rates, population is about 34.66 million as of 2016. The birth rate is 4.65 births per woman as of 2015, and the mortality rate as of 2017 is 257 deaths per 1,000 live births, which is extremely high, one of the largest out of any country. Right now, their population is decreasing, but with the past known trend, it should soon be on the rise. And sadly, because of this, it is believed that with an influx of more people, the poverty will most likely get way worse before it gets any better or levels out. The social classes are based off of race, with the biggest being the upper class Pashtuns and the more average Hazaras. Pashtuns usually being the more wealthy groups, and Hazaras being the ones who are pushed into more severe poverty. There is still heavy bias between all groups as a result of the Afghanistan Civil War, which lasted from 1989 to 1992, and that was between basically every single different race class in Afghanistan, but the two major ones in that civil war were also the Pashtuns and the Hazaras. So intellectually, in terms of schooling level intelligence in the country, it falls short at only 38.2% of the population having literacy over reading and writing. The interesting part of that is that with such a low literacy rate, the country does provide schooling to all citizens, and it is actually a law, which is being the Educational Law of 2008, that citizens must have at least 9 years of compulsory education. And this education system includes primary education, secondary education, higher education, vocational education, teacher training, and religious education. But even though they have all this and all this form of education and laws for it, over 1,000 kids, quote unquote, drop out of schooling every day in Afghanistan. So on the artistic value, there are many forms of media and art that take place in Afghanistan, as it is a country that is driven by culture. Like most countries, it has its own outlets as well as major global news outlets like CNN. It also has TV shows based on pop culture and enjoyment such as Shamshad TV, for example. In terms of physical, Afghanistan also gives access to print of news and media, such as the most popular newspaper called Anis. Afghanistan also has freedom of expression as well, so it's very common to find art in various different forms and opinions, and this can be beneficial as it gives people a new look on the country. But since the country is largely controlled by terrorism, any forms that they do not agree with are usually burned, or the creator of it would, in many cases, sadly be executed. So even though they have freedom of expression, it's not really holed out into such a manner. So looking at allies and enemies, so Afghanistan actually, I say before, the legislative branch, it has lots of allies, including Turkey, the United States, the UK, Japan, Germany, Spain, South Korea, Italy, India, China, Canada, and the United Arab Emirates. For enemies, really the only major country enemy it has is Pakistan, but it obviously is in ties of war between Al Qaeda, the Taliban, and ISIS. So the biggest war that has really had an impact on the country was the Soviet-Afghan War, and here are just some kind of major figureheads that took place. So you have Leonid Brezhnev, and he was the general secretary of the Soviet Union at the time. Yuri Andropov, who was the fourth general secretary of Soviet Russia at the time. Both of those people had major influences, and they were basically in charge of the operation of the 40th Army invading Afghanistan. On the other side, you have Ahmad Shah Massoud, who was the main military leader of the people of Afghanistan, and Abdul Haq, who was an Afghanistani leader who was in vast favor of the people. Sadly, both Ahmad and Abdul, after the war, would be executed and assassinated by the Taliban because they did not agree with their beliefs. So more onto the Soviet-Afghan War. On December 24th, 1979, Soviet Russia invaded Afghanistan. The indigenous peoples of Afghanistan did fight back and never stopped, as it was their homeland. They refused to be dominated even when the government had just gave up on their land. The Afghanistan people were outraged that they were saw as less than human in their own country, and in response to this declared war and used strategies from riots to all-out terrorism in order to dwindle the Russian forces. Examples of this are obviously the Soviet-Afghan War, which was started by the actual people of Afghanistan in response to the invasion, and the Afghanistan resistance movement which was one of the first forms of Sunni terrorism, and nationalism that was born out of this war. So as of right now, though, the most pressing conflict is obviously the Afghanistan war with the United States. This began on October the 7th, 2001, after Al-Qaeda leader Osama bin Laden, who was ironically trained by the United States during the Soviet-Afghan War, ordered the hijacking of American airliners and crashing them into the World Trade Center, Twin Towers in New York City, New York, as well as the Pentagon in Arlington County, Virginia, and a failed attempt that was crash in a field in Somerset County, Pennsylvania, which was supposed to hit the Capitol building in Washington, D.C., before brave passengers on board stopped the hijackers and rammed it into the ground. The United States responded by placing mass amounts of troops into Afghanistan and shelling the al-Qaeda-held strongholds in the country, with some of the largest ones being in the Kabul province and the capital obviously being Kabul. So thank you. These were all my works cited that I used. And lastly, I'd like to thank you again for watching my presentation.